From the Studio 13 Studios in Splendora, Texas.
All right, Jim Spagner here. I made another weekend.
It's good, Jim.
Yeah, I made another weekend. There's a lot of people bet against me. This is the Montgomery County Water Level show, and my guest today is Mike Stoecker. Mike is a developer here in Montgomery County. I've known him for quite a while. I got introduced to Mike when I got introduced to this water situation. So that's how I met him. And he's been a stalwart supporter of doing the right thing in this. He's been in it since the start. Mike is a Texan. He born in Uvalde and grew up. We're not going to hold this against him, but just in a city. And he just told me he had this distinction of graduating from high school there and going off to Wharton. Not Wharton Business School, Wharton Junior College.
Yeah, don't get confused here. Yeah.
So, but I thought, last week I had John Sellers on, and John does a lot of work for Mike in the area of this water stuff, figuring out stuff financially. And we had John on, and he talked about the differential. And I thought it was really important because it's a complicated situation, and John was able to, I think, simplify the concept with people. I'm not going to dig into that unless Mike wants to go there, but
No, I just want to say that it's complicated. It can be complicated, but it's really simple. If the other side would take a deep breath and sit down and have a business-like discussion with you about it,
yes,
then a lot of it could be resolved. But
yeah. On our way over here, Mike and I talked about how this whole thing could have been probably avoided a year ago. Could have been, we could have probably settled this whole thing a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ago, had people been willing to sit down and just be honest with each other. But unfortunately, that's not where we are now. And so the reason I wanted to have Mike on the show is he's got a unique perspective, I believe, as a developer and a guy who's been around Montgomery County a long time, a guy who's been involved in this water situation a long time. Mike owns a water company. What's the name of it? Woodland
Oaks.
Woodland Oaks. So he's not only a developer, as far as having a stake in the county prospering, but he also understands it from being a water company owner and being a guy who's been involved in this from the very start. So with that, I'm gonna ask you, Mike, why did you get involved in this?
Well, not a big fan of big government. And let me just say that initially, I was actually on a committee or two of the the old Lone Star, unelected Lone Star board. And I was gung-ho because
Gung-ho about what?
Gung-ho about their method, about their message that they were trying to send, that, because it is reasonable if you sit around in a room and talk about growth and talk about usage.
Mm-hmm.
It is reasonable to think that there needs to be some limitations on water, and for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I was all in on trying to help the community get to that point where we could fully understand it and fully do what was the right thing for us. It's just that when we got into it afterwards, it became very apparent and clear there were so many different conflicts of interest. That, everything from a local bank president, where kind of find out the River Authority did a lot of their banking was on the board, and who was head of the finance committee for the Lone Star board, except another board member at that bank. So, it was just.
Now, how did they get away with that?
Now, my understanding is that they had a special no conflicts of interest provision put into their enabling legislation,
Mm-hmm.
which should tell you a lot. In other words, they could have a board that they could do business with each other and do, quote, favors for each other, and it wouldn't be a conflict. Well, there's not a board in the world that can ever work effectively long term under that situation. And that's why you have conflicts of interest laws that you do. So it is really, I don't know, it just very unfair to have started this thing with that type of situation.
Now, I understood that the provision for conflict of interest was originally put in because you had MUDs and the River Authority and the Groundwater District and all these people who would, those are natural conflicts already. And it was not meant to be cronyism. It was really meant, if I understood it right, and you can correct me on this, so that me being over here on a MUD board, I might have a different take on stuff than the Groundwater District would or the River Authority would, but because you can't find people who can represent the community, you have to somehow or another allow these people to talk.
Well, I'm certainly not going to disagree that the original intent
Right.
was there.
Right.
But what happens is greed,
Yeah.
mankind,
Yep.
our weaknesses,
Yep.
they show up when they're allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately that led to, in my opinion, we know factually that it led to a couple of rules, of illegal rules, because we took them to court and we proved that the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District Board, the unelected one, had passed some rules that were illegal and otherwise violated Chapter 36 of the Water Code.
Right.
One of those rules was fair share rule. That's a square one concept. You got 10 acres and somebody else has got 100 acres. Then if you give the 10 acre guy 1,000 gallons a month, then the 100 acre guy gets 10 times that.
Right.
And therefore it's fair share, whereas they did it by permit. And otherwise, I'm not quite sure of all the details, but that was a square one no-go. And yet they allowed that to happen. And I'm of the opinion that certainly the attorney that was for the Lone Star Board knew that, along with, after a period of time, some of the board members had to have known that. Then there was another provision that they said, well, they allowed you to import water from other counties because Chapter 36 very specifically forbade them from not allowing you to import water from other counties in order to resolve your issue if you could go buy it in the marketplace.
So if we could go to Liberty County, since they don't use as much, and buy what we need that we don't have, if we didn't have, that would be perfectly legal.
That would be perfectly legal under Chapter 36 of the Water Code.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did was they said, you can do that, but we give you no credit. In other words, you're doing it because you're a nice guy and that you're going to spend all this money doing it, but you still have to abide by our rules, which is going to cost your consumers even as much, 2 and 3 times as much. So why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, they took away.
So you're still going to have to buy surface water from us.
Like it or not, you have us to choose from, or you have us to choose from, or you have us to choose from.
And if you choose to do something else besides that, you're still going to pay us.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so if I went to Liberty County and imported a 10,000 acre feet, and I'm a water company and I'm serving some giant neighborhood with that water, I'm still going to not only pay that cost,
right,
but now I'm going to pay the SJRA cost.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
And we took them to court.
Yes.
And after 2 years and several $100,000, we get, you might say, all the way to the courthouse steps, and they go, "You're right, we're wrong."
And that's where the 100,000 acre foot concession came in.
And I'm not quite sure how that fits in.
Well, what they did is they had done a strategic, I know this for a fact, a strategic water study that said, even though they had rules that said we're going to cut back to 64,000 acre feet,
right,
they're holding this over there in their back pocket that it's okay to pump 100,000. So when they get to the courthouse steps, rather than go in there and
right,
they said, we'll give you the 100,000.
Right.
That's what they said. And I don't think that was ever implemented. I think they went ahead, y'all went ahead and went to court, and they found the rules to be invalid,
and we won.
Yes.
And hands down we won, and they knew it all along, which really begs the question of not only did the lawyer know it, but which one of those board members knew it, especially those where, again, we're back to the conflict of interest, especially those who had some direct benefit of getting along with what the Lone Star Board, unelected again, Lone Star Board wanted at that time. So it was a very unfair situation, unfair to the consumers.
So let's go all the way back now. So I think that's important. All that was very important, and all that illustrates something that should have never happened, period. Never should have happened. Should have never gotten there. I contend that Montgomery County, with its growth and its desirability as a county, made it ripe for something like this to occur. So, and let me just say this, that doesn't excuse anything, but I want to talk about going forward. So now we find ourselves 2023. This county's growing like crazy, right? The surrounding counties are starting to fall into that. And we have an artificial pumping cap in Montgomery County that was imposed on us by GMA 14. I contend with a whole lot of help from the SJRA and Harris Galveston. The pumping cap came because of a drumbeat to scare everybody about subsidence and its connection to flooding. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. Here we sit in 2023. We're not at 64,000. Thank goodness the elected board has worked really hard and gotten the GMA to agree to 97,000 acre feet, which is less than the strategic waters study back.
Right.
But all right, we're at 97, and we're running up on pumping 80,000 acre feet in the county.
Right.
So, and we've got a water plant sitting over there that was built under these corrupt, sort of greed, nefarious circumstances, but it's there. So talk just a little bit, Mike, about, and then we'll get more into the connection between the two things I just talked about, but was that water plant needed?
You could say that it was, but maybe not that particular type. Let me back up and just simply say that what I talked about the illegal part of this is really, at the end of the day, beside the point when it comes to the ultimate, what's good for Montgomery County.
Yes.
And that, because at the end of the day, we can forgive them and we can all go down the road and say, okay, you went about it illegally, you went about it wrong, ethically, but this is a good program for us. And so let's go figure out how to implement it. Well, the problem is when you have that kind of situation, it makes you then start looking at everything. Well, and so the question becomes, is what they propose good for us? Well, do we need it? Well, we need something.
Do we need it now? I guess my question is, when it was built, did we need it?
Let me give you a small example, not small, but City of Conroe had their own water planning study done. I think it was 2015-16, where they estimated the amount of water that they needed, the infrastructure they had, was good for something like 30, 40 years. Okay.
So out 2040.
Yeah. So I mean, 30 plus 20, 15 is
long time.
45. Yeah. No, long time. And so it's in some ways I relate it to the green movement. Okay. Here we go. We're going to all die in 12 years. Well, I hate to tell you that, but it's been 6 years since they posted that. And so we all only have 6 more years to live because of climate change, man-made climate change. Well, I'm not disagreeing that there's some issues. How could you not say, okay, absolutely
no impact?
No impact. No, you can't say that. Just like you can't say there's no impact on the water. Well, sure there's an impact. So how do you go about it in a cost-effective manner and use capitalism at the same time with the government to end up with the best program for the citizens? The most cost-effective, by the way, not a $560 million phase one, which phase two that was going to be $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
And that's been several years ago. So now with inflation and everything else, it's a $2 billion program.
At least.
And so had we sat quietly in the corner and not done anything, we would already, by the way, per their plans, we would already be building phase 2 as of right now as we're sitting
Be
here.
way down the road on phase 2.
Yeah. So here, you think your water bills are high now. Had we not sued them and put a check in the system and brought up all these nefarious things that they did, and then started really looking into the science and math, then we would be in a phase 2 where your water bills, instead of $3 and something per thousand, it would be $6 and $8 per thousand here real soon.
Headed toward 10 or 12 with phase 3 or
You
whatever.
know, brought on by this great bureaucracy of the concept of we're the government and we're here to help you.
Right.
Yeah, right. Sure. This was a bureaucracy thing. Everything from the lawyers on behalf of the making several $1 million putting this program together, to one particular individual who's no longer there, having a career move that could be his go down in infamy for this whole program and how he saved us. Well, that was not necessary. Did we need to do something? Yes, probably. Did we need to do some long-term planning? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
But it seems to me like, Mike, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but,
That's okay.
but it seems to me like doing the right thing for the citizens was not the primary goal.
Absolutely not.
And once you get off that track of what's the right thing for the citizens of this county long term, and I'm not saying we wouldn't have had to do some stuff. I mean, it's foolish to think that growth goes on forever and everybody's going to keep drinking out of the same hole and there'll be enough. I just don't know what there'll be, but it seemed to me like at the time we were consuming 64,000 acre feet of water, which is what we were consuming, but it was an artificial cap. And even the USGS came out and said there's this huge amount of water underneath Montgomery County and even if we could only get 25% of it, we had way more than enough water to go out to 2045,
Right.
2050, somewhere like that.
Texas Water Development Board, when it came down to the Catahoula in particular, said there is a sea of water below us. So there's alternate sources besides Lake Conroe.
Right.
And just as it's been proven by all, you might say, on Highway 105 West, going west of Conroe, everything north around the lake, rather than join this onerous GRP program, they were required to go drill something as an alternative source. Well, they went down to the Catahoula. Yes, some operating expenses, making it a better quality water was higher than normal, but still very, very much cheaper
Than the surface water.
out of Lake Conroe.
So not only did they get cheaper water just on the cost of the water, but by not joining the GRP, by finding the alternative source, they're not paying to pump that water either.
That's correct. No, it's like drilling their own water well.
Yeah.
That cost is what they've got.
So when I was living in Magnolia and I got my water from a private water supplier, on my water bill, not only was the cost of the water my water supplier pumped and sent me, but I had to pay through him the exact same amount, basically, to the SJRA for the pleasure of pumping my water.
Right. Yeah, so people who did not actually use lake water end up subsidizing those who do.
So they pay even more than the people using the surface water.
No, actually, there's the differential, but the people in the woodlands, if you will, which, as we look back, oversimplified, but it is this simple. They could have let the water run downstream out of Lake Conroe and captured it down there somewhere south and put a treatment plant, call it a $50 million, $100 million one, call it $175 million one, $200 million. Guess what? 200 from $560 million
big jump.
is a big jump. So it would have lasted the woodlands for many, many, many years and accomplished the
And
goal.
they could have paid for it.
And they could have paid for it. Or even if you say, but everybody benefits because they're going to that, wouldn't it be better off to have a much smaller
The
plant,
bite.
a much lower amount of debt to service that is more cost effective? Back to that cost effective concept, whereas otherwise I'm the government and I'm here to help you.
Right.
Back to that
I don't
again.
care about cost.
Yeah, why somebody else is paying it. That is in fact one of the things that they were very surprised that we filed suit against them in the very beginning. They couldn't understand why private enterprise would be able to pass on this expense to our consumers with absolutely no cost to us and just have our consumers pay it.
And that would make you mad?
And that we should just go along, get along.
Yeah, shouldn't make you mad.
No, it's okay to bend the consumer over, but no, it's not. Not only that, it's just not the right thing to do, and it's just big government.
Yeah.
We don't need big government. If we just allowed it all to happen, then you can just imagine the socialistic style country that we would be living in.
Yeah, we're headed that way, I'm afraid, anyway.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can, because I still want to move to the forward thinking
Sure.
part of this. So right now, we got a $560 million, we probably don't owe that much on it now, but $560 million water plant sitting there.
Right.
It's feeding the Woodlands and it's feeding Conroe, maybe a little bit to somebody else, Porter or somewhere, maybe getting some. I don't know who all's getting it, but it's clearly limited to phase one. But it's sitting there. Those bonds are sitting there. We have a GRP group, committee, a GRP program
Right.
run by the SJRA that collects money from anybody who was forced into the GRP. So if you couldn't get an alternative water source,
Right.
or you were going to pump more than 10 million gallons a year, you were forced into joining one of these things or be fined $10,000 a day for not joining.
And thus the reason why we joined.
Right, right. And when you joined, the price that you were passing along also was quite a bit different than it is today.
Right.
I don't remember what the initial price was, but it was cents per thousand versus dollars
Yeah, it was
per thousand.
Certainly half.
Okay, so where we stand right now, we've got this GRP that's collecting all this money from these people. It can't grow anymore because the courts found that methodology was illegal.
Right.
So nobody else has to join a GRP. So you can go out and build your subdivision, drill your own well. Lone Star will give you a permit and furnish your people water, and your people are going to pay a much less cost than the neighborhood next door that was built 8 years ago or 10 years ago and was forced into a GRP.
Which shows you the fallacy, another
All right.
fallacy. in
So,
the whole
but
thing.
that's where we are right now.
Right, right.
Okay, so we know that's not fair, right? And I'm not saying it's not fair because those other people aren't paying. I'm saying it's not fair because these guys are paying exclusively. So we've got a small audience paying for a big bite.
Right.
We have a water plant that's probably at some point going to be useful, needed. I don't mean useful, needed. I don't know when. I know that we still have some room to go groundwater wise. I believe we can take more groundwater out of the ground than we are now. I believe the 100,000
Absolutely.
is artificial. I believe, I don't know, I'm not a hydrogeologist, and everything I say here would be just a guess, but let's assume we could take 50% more water. If you listen to what the USGS and the Texas Water Development Board say, we have 183 million acre feet of water beneath Montgomery County. And the only reason we're being held to a smaller amount of water is because once the people who are trying to force us onto surface water, once they were found out, because they were using the fact that we're running out of water as the reason,
Right.
once that myth was debunked, we got 183 million acre feet. If you pump 64,000 a year and you don't have any recharge back, no water gets back in, this thing's isolated and you're just going to pump out of it.
Right.
In 300 years, you drop the aquifer by 1%.
Right.
300 years. That's if there were no water going in it. So all of a sudden the argument of we're running out of water, that's out the window.
No.
Second argument. All right, now we're going to grab subsidence. Because we just had this big storm called Harvey. A lot of people flooded. Harvey would have flooded if you lived on a hill. I mean, there was so much water fell so fast.
Right.
Nobody, it was a 500-year flood. Nobody was prepared for it. Nothing we could do. But all of a sudden now, it's subsidence. So they grabbed the subsidence argument and started saying, and they pointed to Brownwood down in Baytown, which was originally 6 or 8 feet above sea level when they built it. And the subsidence did happen down there. Shallow aquifer.
Subsidence is real in certain places.
It's real.
No doubt.
It's real. But the question becomes, is it a problem at 100 feet above sea level? Is it really a major contributor of flooding? Now, if you look on the SJRA's website, it's not even on there. If you look at the Harris County, I believe, flood study that was done in 2015, the word subsidence, and it was a study on what projects need to be built and why and to stop flooding. Subsidence isn't even mentioned on there, except that Harris-Galveston Subsidence District helped with a study, and their name, subsidence, is in their name, and that's the only reason it's even in that study. So all that said, we're still in a place where they want to force people to stay in the GRPs and to maintain a way to pay for that water plant the way they're doing it.
Right.
Montgomery County's growing. That water plant is a viable water plant. What do we do? What should we do?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because there's $500 million in bonds.
Yeah.
And nobody wants us to default on the bonds.
Right.
And
You don't want that, do you?
No.
I don't want that.
No, it's a great state of Texas, and we're here to protect it just like we are anything else.
Right.
But not through a bunch of falsehoods.
Right.
You know, there's a variety of things, and don't know that we have time to go into the detail today.
I just want to stay at a high level.
Yeah, but we could make use of that. But there's some things. That's what the multiple lawsuits.
Yeah.
Notice I said multiple. It's not like there's just one.
Right.
But you know, if the people, you might say on the other side, would be willing to sit down and have a intelligent business type conversation, an adult one, right? The problem is they're scared that they're going to be proved wrong, so they don't want to sit down. I hate getting
Proved
back
wrong about what?
What about the whole system?
Scheme?
The whole scheme. The whole scheme was, I mean, if you take subsidence, all the players in this game know about excentometers, for example. If you take subsidence, excentometers been around since 51. And I know that's 72 years ago because that's when I was born, okay? So, been around a long time.
You don't look 72, Mike. You probably used to.
Okay, I'm buying lunch, okay? I'm buying lunch. But if they would have just installed 5 or 6 excentometers around Montgomery County 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and said, just in case we have a subsidence issue, let's go study it. Mm-hmm. And that way we can make decisions based on science and math. But here we are today without any excentometers in Montgomery County, a $560 million program, of which at least part of, and as they lose the we're running out of water argument, then they keep raising the subsidence argument, which I understand could have some validity, especially in the shallower aquifers. But we would all be talking about science and math, and then we would only be talking about what we were going to do and when we were going to do it and how much it cost, and work out the most cost-effective manner in which to accomplish the goal of resolving water subsidence issues within Montgomery County. But no, they didn't do it, and yet they knew those tools were there the whole time. I hate keep getting negative about them, but
well, I mean, the fact is that's why we're here.
Right. That's why there's multiple lawsuits.
Right.
At least half the argument, meaning subsidence argument, would not be having an argument today because we would have science, we would have math.
So we would know how much we could take out of these aquifers.
Absolutely. We would know how much which aquifer
Yes.
subsided in what period of time after
Yeah.
taking out so much water, and therefore we could gauge it and we could say, okay, let's start with $100 million water plant process today, and then build on it over the years as we see that metrics changing and adjusting accordingly. So if you want to call that half the problem, meaning subsidence, and then the other is that we're running out of water, then 50% of the problem very well could have gone away
with the extensometers.
And had absolutely, and it doesn't have any legitimate concerns in Montgomery County at this time for the purposes of this program of $560 million. And it's just a falsehood.
So it's your contention, if I read you right, that even today we could sit down and start to have at least an adult conversation about what do we do? We got a $500 million debt over here. We've got a plant and the amount of infrastructure that goes with that plant that's just toppling the citizens of this county over, the ones that are having to pay for it.
Right.
We don't know how efficiently that money's being used even. I don't have any idea. I mean, I know they're collecting, at the time, my water bill in Magnolia was about, in the summer, was $750 a month. And I know about 300 of that went to the SJRA. I have no idea how they were spending that money.
Well, we still don't, but one of the suggestion I had at last month's meeting, and I'm starting to have them do a little historical analysis of it, and let's have an open,
now, when you say
conversation. They, meaning the staff at the GRP level. And it's an efficiency study, just like, and I just happened to read where A&M did it, Texas A&M did it, and they recognized 41 different changes that they could make within their system. Big university. Well, same conceptual issue.
Yeah, I've
here.
worked with hundreds of corporations.
Right, you do that.
Yes, that.
Right.
I mean, yeah. So
it's a very square one concept.
It is.
That
and you should want to do it on yourself.
Right. We're always looking for ways to do things better. So how could they not be in for a study of this group that has 120 something employees at this time?
Now, is that an excessive amount of employees, you think?
On the surface, it appears to be, and what I've not quite got clear is, for example, they had, when they first started this, there wasn't any lawsuits way back whenever, and so with that in mind, it is reasonable to think that they overhired because they were going to do phase 2 and 3 and 4 and all that. So did they ever cut back? And they have a staff sharing concept there too. And so the question becomes, are you better off with your own staff, or are you better off with their system? And I'm not saying their system is bad. I'm just saying that there's
Let's look at it.
Yeah, let's look at it. Let's how do we do it better? And so therefore, maybe we could change things to the point of lowering the rates by 10%. Well, look at that return.
Yeah, or paying the debt down quicker.
Yeah.
So those 120 people, just for those who are listening, if you haven't been listening in the past or whatever, the GRP was the groundwater reduction program.
That's correct.
So you were forced to join that. It's a formal thing. SJRA has the biggest one there is, and the reason that a lot of people joined the SJRA one was you could spread the reductions you had to do across many people. There was a benefit to that. As far as if you had to join one, there was a benefit to that. But here's my question. What do they do? So what do those 120 people do, actually?
That's a good question. That's the rabbit hole I'm going down right now. And so it's going to take more than one meeting and several meetings to come to a conclusion of whether this study is needed. And if so, what exactly would we study for the money? And therefore, what kind of savings we might potentially have.
So how much money does the GRP collect a year?
Oh, I don't
Do,
know.
do you know?
Millions.
60 million?
It's about $60 million.
Okay, so let's assume we could get a 10% saving. That's $6 million a year.
Not chump change.
Yeah. And let's assume we could get 20%. I mean,
Yeah,
if you
now
could get
it's
a
off the
20%
chart.
savings, yeah, you could pay that debt down a heck of a lot quicker. And so my goal, and I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth here, I hope, but I think everybody's goal in the county is it would be foolish to go demolish that plant.
Yeah, no.
Even though it's not needed right this minute,
it's
it'd be
not
foolish to
needed.
do it. But it's also foolish to continue burdening people the way we're burdening the ones we're burdening.
And operate it more fairly for those who
Yes.
either receive water or
Yes.
don't receive water, and we all end up.
So one thing would be, can we be more efficient? And we ought to know that,
Right.
right? So if we could save, so for example, in Magnolia, if I was sending $300 a month to the GRP,
Right.
and I could cut that to $240, that'd be great. Or continue sending the $300 and pay the debt down so that I don't have to send it forever.
Right.
And eventually, because if that water plant were paid off, it'd be extremely viable.
Oh yeah, this is no different than your family budget.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got some debt over here, whether it's a car or your house or whatever it is, if you can figure out how to come up with more money to pay off the debt, you're just miles ahead. It makes you breathe ever
Man,
so
you bet.
easier every
So
month.
so one idea would be, one place to start that would pay for itself. It's not that expensive to do compared to, if you look at a $60 million drag money wise, you can probably get this study done for $1 million, maybe less. I don't know what it takes. I don't know how big it is, but it seemed like something as small as that GRP. I've seen them done for less than that on huge, like the whole Gulf of Mexico for an oil
Right.
company.
Right.
And the savings always are significant. I've never seen one happen where the people doing the study came back, but nope, y'all are perfect.
No such thing.
So-
My office is a good example.
Yeah,
I don't run my office perfect,
right.
so I'm open to suggestions from
So
anybody else.
so one thing we could do to help preserve that plant and look into the future would be to make sure it's running efficiently, that
Yes.
we're operating. Second thing that I've heard was when John was here last week was, let's figure out this differential issue.
Right. What's fair?
What's fair
What's
here?
truly fair?
What's truly fair, and that could be a way to save some serious, or just redistribute money in a way.
Yeah, and along that line, let's make people sure that people are aware of the fact that the San Jacinto River Authority, who orchestrated this whole thing,
Yes.
okay, owns the water wells in the woodlands and manages all the mud districts in the woodlands.
Every one of them.
So they have a conflict of interest automatically.
Already.
All right. And so the differential, to kind of give you a big picture of one of the suits we filed was the differential. Well, because they only had it at 19 cents, I believe it was, difference between what higher rate for the people in the woodlands to pay, yet they were saving
For the
all-
surface water.
for the surface water, versus the groundwater, because they were saving all this M&O and capital expenditures, et cetera.
Right.
And historically, way before this particular groundwater reduction plan was put into effect, it's a little bit like the extentometers. They knew all along that would answer the question.
Right.
Well, they knew all along that the minimum rate differential has been somewhere around 42 cents per thousand. And
And
yet,
this is at
other places.
river authorities and places where they
Yes,
did
and the
surface
past
water.
president of the River Authority, he knew that. So why did he give the woodlands,
A 30 cent.
well, a break of any sort,
Yeah.
do it fairly? And once, amazingly, once we sent him nasty letters saying we're going to sue you, which we did, he adjusted it up to the 42 cents. Well, now,
What is it really though?
but that's his number right now.
That's back to the efficiency study.
Right, back to that. And whether that should be 42 cents or 52 cents or
Yeah.
a dollar or not,
Yeah.
I'm not sitting here saying today, but it just shows you the unfairness of the whole thing.
So let me put it in the context that hopefully the average citizen can understand.
Right,
If the people in the woodlands were paying a fair differential. Let's assume they're paying 20 cents now. Let's keep it in round numbers.
Right.
And it ought to be 40 cents.
Right.
That 20 cents could have been taken off of the people who were paying for that
Right.
low differential. So my water bill in Magnolia would have been the equivalent of 20 cents a thousand cheaper.
Less. That's correct.
Yeah. So what happens is me sitting over here in Magnolia, not getting a drop of that water, I'm subsidizing. Not only are the Woodlands guys getting it cheaper, they're getting it cheaper because I'm subsidizing it.
That's right. But you got to understand, back to that conflict of interest where
Yeah.
own the water wells, manage all the mud districts.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're actually making money in addition to the differential.
Right.
It actually makes them money to pump more groundwater in the Woodlands than it does surface water because it's cheaper and they get to charge the surface water price and or the differential for it. So that makes that water even more profitable, that groundwater.
Well, and then the really unfair part of it is to understand that there's a lot of people throughout Montgomery County who don't live in the Woodlands. And the Woodlands is a wonderful place, been voted the best place to live many times over the years, and it is an absolutely wonderful place to live. The average income in the Woodlands is probably 3 times what it is throughout Montgomery County, at least. And so why are they getting a break and they're using reverse sociology?
When I go over to Grangerland,
right,
and look at the average income in Grangerland, and they're paying the freight.
right.
No, I agree.
No, it's just totally unfair.
Yeah. So we could do something around efficiency, which would be helpful.
Right,
We could do something around differential, which is going to be helpful.
right.
What other ideas do you have? And I'm not asking you what'll work or not work. So even maybe more basic, how do we get a group of people to sit down?
No. Their side is driven by the attorneys, and so the attorneys are the same attorneys who got the $4 to $5 million for putting this deal together in the first place.
Right.
So
They
don't
have a
want
stake in not sitting down.
Yeah,
But let's transcend that. Let's assume they're never going to play.
right.
Is there a way to force a sit down of some type?
I don't know if there's a way to force one other than
Or put
through
enough
the
pressure
court.
on?
Well, the court system is going to eventually put enough system on them to make them talk. And just another small example is, it's not small, but within the contract there's a provision that if you fail to go to mediation and the other side wins, you automatically lose all your attorney fees.
Right.
Well, a small segment of that, as I understand it, has been won by the city of Conroe.
It has.
And they won $4 million off of it just because the other side wouldn't come sit down
And talk.
and have a conversation, just like you and I are having now.
Right.
And you and I don't agree on everything,
Right.
and so it's okay. But at least you get a little bit closer. That's what mediation is all about,
Yep.
is to save a lot of time and money and attorney fees,
Yeah. And hopefully get to a solution that's not perfect, but everybody can live with it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the issue here.
That's the ultimate goal.
So it's interesting to me that you've got the River Authority, which is an executive branch. The governor owns it, basically, if I read it right.
Right.
You got Lone Star over there, which is a state, the state of Texas legislature and all that chartered us. We have state laws we have to go by, but we're elected, so we report to the citizens,
Right.
essentially. SJRA does not go to the citizens. You've got Harris Galveston Subsidence District, who I'm assuming is set up sort of like the River Authority.
Right.
All of them formed by statutes. Then you've got the House, and you got the Senate, and you got the Texas Water Development Board.
Okay.
All of these people are players. And I understand the Texas Water Development Board's reluctance. It's the same one the SJRA has, I believe, and that is that they're holding the bag for the money.
Right.
They financed it. And they didn't do due diligence when they financed it, or we wouldn't be here,
No, they're
right? So
part of the bureaucratic process.
yeah. So those two entities, I would suspect, unless the court brings them to the table, they're not going to voluntarily
No,
come
that
to
or
the
the
table.
politicians bring them to.
Well,
force them
that's
to
the
come.
other piece. How do we get the politicians to the table? I mean,
You know, they've actually done as good a job as they could so
have.
far, and I really want to thank both Will Metcalf and Brandon Creighton for what they've done. However,
and I want to add Lois Colcourse to that.
very good. You're right.
She did really. I thought she had some really good thinking in the hearing that I
Yeah.
attended.
And I'm sure there was more than that.
Oh, there is.
But it's to have that same effort put into putting a bug in their ear saying you need to go sit down with them. Okay, you need to save your ratepayers some attorney fees if possible.
Mm-hmm.
You need to save everybody and try to work out a solution. And now again, maybe with the past president gone, and maybe the new blood will see some wisdom in that, and it won't be a matter of the new guy did not create this, and therefore it's not his to lose.
So he gets to start with a clean sheet of paper.
He does. Yeah, he does.
Or she, or whoever
Right.
they put in there.
Right.
So our legislator, and you know, just for people who don't know, the past GM of the River Authority resigned,
Right.
and I suspect the motivation for that was this mess, and not being willing to sit down and talk about it. But
You're being nice.
I'm being very nice. But I really would like to urge, and I'd like to hear your take on this. I would like to urge Brandon and Will and Lois and Betancourt and Ernest Bales and Cecil Bell,
Right.
all of them.
All of them.
When we get a new GM, because I know they're looking for one, they ought to be talking to that person about this, that there is on this side a willingness to try to figure out how to deal with this in a way that doesn't turn the apple cart upside down and is the best thing for Montgomery County long term. And I would love for our legislative contingent to put a bug in the new GM's ear.
Yeah, I think as a matter of course of business, they need to say, if you're going to be the new GM, you need
Be
to
the
be
new
willing to
GM.
sit down and negotiate and have an intelligent business-like conversation with
Yeah.
the other side. Understanding that we still might not be able to reach an agreement, but at least we've narrowed the scope up, and we've all look each other in the eye and we
Yeah.
tried.
Well, at a minimum, even if we can't agree on the best way to go forward, there's some ideas that one idea you put forward, and I think it's a great one, is the efficiency idea.
Right.
That's going to save some money,
Right.
one way or another. That's a step in the right direction, and
Well,
I believe the differential is a step in the right direction.
It is, and both of those economic revenue sources could be, as to your point, applied to the debt.
Yes.
Because what's going to happen, and we know this, and you have an office building, for example. As it gets older, it has more maintenance. No reason to believe the maintenance is going to go down on this other than the way we save money through this study.
Right.
And so with that in mind, paying the debt down with all this money would give us a way to balance it out. So at least we would still have a deduction in the monthly bill, but long term have a better one.
Yeah. So I think there's, even if we can't come to an agreement of the best way to deal with the
Right.
GRP situation, the financing of the plant and all of that stuff, even if we could, if on a yearly basis you could reduce the bite by 20%,
It's a big bite.
that's a big bite, and it pays that plant down. Because once that plant's paid for, even with the small audience that it's serving,
Right.
comparatively small, it's viable. It just,
Well,
it's
and
hard
even
to,
though it is, we feel like it is way overbuilt
Yep.
today
Yep.
for what we needed, then it will be there for when we need something that size later on.
Yep.
Okay, and like it or not, it's
Yeah. But I mean, even if it's, so my deal is, if we could get that debt retired on that plant, then you can afford to build infrastructure to further the water out. So
Right.
How do you get water to Magnolia? Well, it costs money.
costs a lot of money.
So
Or you start pumping more to the individual
Yes.
places like the Woodlands or all the mud districts that are currently
So instead of
hooked up.
65, 35, 50, 50, they're at 100% surface water. I mean, that's the most radical. So they're all on surface water. And if you think about it, the Woodlands takes somewhere in the neighborhood probably of, with the increase they've asked, 10,000 acre feet a year. And then you
Right.
take Conroe and you take that amount that they're taking and not utilizing,
Right.
you increase that, and all of a sudden, now to the 97, if you don't get any more, if you can't, you just bump that up to 120. So you've
Right.
added another 10 years of runway before you have to spend any infrastructure money.
Right. And therefore it's more cost effective.
Yep.
The same conceptual conversations they should have had in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And again, gone back to very possibly resolved any near future issues with a $150 million plant versus a $560 million
Yeah.
plant.
So one last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll shut this thing off. People can only tolerate so much. Yeah,
I understand.
know. I
Believe
get
me.
it. Growth, Montgomery County.
Oh, it's coming.
What's it look like to you? I mean,
Oh, it's here, like it or not.
yeah,
And so to that point, we're going to need more water,
yeah,
and we're going to need better studies, more open, honest conversations about what water we're going to need and when and where.
yeah.
Um,
And the reality is, we can't get water to everybody in Montgomery County.
no, but
There's water, but we can't surface water everybody.
no, you can't surface water everybody. That'd be
I mean, Harris County's not even doing it.
no. And that concept is you could just expand what you've got now.
You overproduce in small areas.
Back to the concept of the Woodlands taking more, Conroe taking more. Everybody who's currently receiving water from them takes more, and then that way it makes up for the other. But there's a fair way to do it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And then the other interesting thing I'd just like to hear you just for a second talk about is, so I moved here to Montgomery County in 2007, and I moved to Magnolia, and 1488 was a 2-lane
Yeah.
blacktop highway. There was nothing out there basically. And now it looks like 1960. And when we were coming over here down 2090, and this whole east side of the neighborhoods are just popping up. Development is happening. People are coming to Montgomery County. It's a great place to live. I don't blame them. We're not going to stop the growth,
No.
right? So what's happening here to me is an indicator of what's going to be happening now in Waller, in Grimes, in San Jacinto, and Liberty County. We're on steroids here. We're sort of the epicenter because we're the closest to Harris County right? So it came here first, but it's going there. That's going to have an impact on the aquifer doesn't care what county you're in, right?
No, it doesn't. And that's what's really one of the unfair things about it. We have Grimes County over there that has about a 25,000 people population today, and just on the subdivisions that's been approved and otherwise people have bought the land,
Right.
they're going to have 100,000 people over there. Vast majority of them starting about 2 miles from the city of Magnolia.
Yeah.
So it's these rules are made for Montgomery County, and yet the aquifers do not recognize county lines.
Right.
But you could get, for example, there's on the east side, 2090 area, there's probably 15,000 acres of undeveloped land right there right now in big tracts. I'm not talking about all the 5 and 10 acre stuff. I'm talking about.
No, I see 900 acres, 600 acres.
Right, all of that. So, for example, which you can today under the rules, but you would go to Liberty in San Jacinto County somewhere, have a pipeline, and bring water over. And I know it's at least reasonable to think that because I sat down many years ago with a company, and I can't remember the name of them, but they had a bunch of timberland over there, and they were talking about creating a water field and shipping water over here. And of course, the contract that we ended up having to sign because of a $10,000 a day fine precluded and otherwise wouldn't allow us to do that. we're going to need water.
Yep.
There's no doubt about it, but we're going to do it in a cost-effective fashion. Back to the green movement, you don't go cut oil and gas pipelines off and go, well, we're not going to build pipelines. Well, guess what that did? We see the after effect of that.
Yep.
It's called inflationary, at least in that particular area.
Well, I know in Liberty County there's 4 big wells there. Somebody drilled. Somebody referred to them as the American wells or something. I don't know who drilled them. But that was going to be an export project coming this way.
Right.
And somehow or another, I don't know what happened to it, but I understand the wells are still there. So importing water into Montgomery County is a viable alternative. The problem they're going to get into is that those counties are going to turn into us before it's over with.
Yeah, but that is so far down the road. Not that we shouldn't think about it, because we should.
But they're 50 or 100 years down the road to get where we are.
And the question becomes, what's the most cost-effective manner at that time to get water to us? Or is it time finally for a pipeline from the Gulf of Mexico straight up here and give us
Desalinization.
Desalinization. How cost-effective is that today, and how cost-effective will that be as compared to other alternative sources in the future? Again.
Well, and you know, cost is and it's really strange. When I was a kid, and I hate to admit this, but I was smoking. I remember thinking, God almighty, cigarettes are fixing to go to 35 cents a pack. I'm going to have to quit smoking. And I said, when cigarettes get to 50 cents a pack, nobody's going to smoke. Well, that was fallacy.
Right.
And so it really gets down to, when you talk about economics, the green movement is just so expensive still. It can't pay for itself.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong conceptually
with
it at all.
And the same thing's going to happen with water. It's that desal right now is even more expensive than surface water.
Right.
But when that's all you've got left, and you figure a way to equalize the cost across the population,
the users.
Yeah, the user, then it becomes very viable. So I think that's coming. There's no doubt about it. Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming and spending some time and talking about this stuff. Let me just say, the biggest enemy we have in this county when it comes to this water stuff is ignorance.
It is.
It really is. If people really understood the importance of this and what's going on and what challenges we're faced with right now and the issues with this water plant, differential, all of this stuff, if people understood that, I believe we'd be in a very different place. But, you know, it's like one of those other things. We're all busy, and right now, for a lot of people, water's not number one thing on their priority. Now, for me in Magnolia, when I got that first $750 water bill,
that got your attention.
It became a real priority for me. And I know one of the city councilmen in Conroe in June last year got a $1,500 water bill.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it becomes a priority when that happens. The trouble is, by that time that happens, we're already in the muck. And it's hard to, so we're trying to fix it rather than.
We are. And there's a solution out there.
Yeah.
Put some brains together and
I firmly believe that.
Have open, honest conversations, and amazing what can happen.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming and talking about it.
You bet.
Hopefully we're educating people and waking some people up in higher places maybe.
Right.
And so thank you for your time, Mike.
Thank you.
All righty.
Bye. Appreciate it.
You bet.